pod, dude.
Pod.
Oh, taking a sick video of us, dude.
So excited.
We've had so many talks. Say.
Yeah. But it's
Backstage.
the last one, and it's gonna be the best one. It's gonna be great.
Do you have a Zen in your mouth and you're smoking?
I don't have a Zen in my mouth.
Okay.
This is a great catastrophe.
Well, nice meeting you. I'll find a nice place with this camera.
Hi everyone. Thanks for coming. My name's Alex. I'm the event coordinator here at Stories. Is it loud enough? Does it sound okay? Cool. Yeah, I'm very excited for the event tonight. We did the event for Scanfro like a few months ago, and it was wonderful. Anytime this publisher asks us to do an event, it's kind of a no-brainer, and it was a great conversation with Max, and we're gonna do it again with Sean, and it's gonna be great. Everyone, give it up for Max and Sean.
Cheers. Hey, thank you for coming, guys. We just had a few days of events, and so we're trying to make this conversation both the culmination of all the stuff we've been talking about for 4 days, and also intelligible, because you probably haven't read the book, obviously.
I see a couple people. You good? Yeah, I see a couple people with the book. Is it on?
Kind of.
Turn it up a little bit.
Yeah.
You should know how to do that by now.
I know. Nice. Yeah, so Moresco. No. I'm locking in. Just pounding that espresso.
We're talking about
How would you how should we start about Moresco? Should we talk
how
about
should we
what
start
this is
about the belligerent genius mission we're on.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I should talk about how you approached me about the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, obviously, Deep Vellum. Max is notorious for translating massive, sometimes inscrutable books. He reached out to me last fall and said, "Sean, this is your book. This is the autofiction. This is a weird autofiction
About a guy who thinks he's a
massive
monk.
book about a guy who goes into a monastery and kind of goes through the most foundational experiences in his life in a formally strange way."
Mode, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's a 3-volume book. This is the first
3-volume trilogy. It's a trilogy. So it's a trilogy of 3 books. This is the first book of the 3, and simultaneously the first book is made up of 3 parts, each of which represent a distinct existential stage in the life of this striving young Italian man. The first stage, he wants to be a monk, fails at that. Second stage, he wants to be a revolutionary, fails at that. Third stage, he wants to be a writer, fails at that. And the book is the excrescence of that failure. It's what's left behind for you to pick over and wonder why he failed and didn't fail. And the book itself this is why Sean's going to start picking on me, because the book is a failure, but it's a very interesting failure that you can go very deep into and learn a lot from. But the book is out of print in Italy. But why should you read it then? That's the question.
Yeah.
And there are good answers to that. Sean has them. I don't have them. No, I'm kidding.
No, it was a very interesting experience reading this book. I think on the one hand, it's formally almost repetitive. It has a mesmerized. Moresco is interesting because on the one hand, he's on the forefront. He's seen as on the forefront of going past kind of the postmodern mode of this sort of type of expansive novel that tries to include everything.
Maximalist.
Type of maximalist novel that tries to include everything. Often operates in a mode of kind of conveying some type of knowledge in some type of obscure way. If we're talking about like David Foster Wallace or Pynchon, Gaddis.
And that's actually a big problem we have, is that in America in particular, there's this sort of notion that all difficult or interesting writing should fall directly into the mode of Pynchon. Well, I guess you should actually say Pynchon, right? Or
sure.
He pronounces his own name on The Simpsons weirdly, but that's neither here nor there. But the point is that people want difficult fiction to fall into the mode of Pynchon or Gaddis or Gas. It's being incredibly formally tuned, right, and constructed encompass a lot of different subjects. And when things break outside of that mode, they get very nervous and don't necessarily want to engage with it.
Yeah. So I think what makes this book different is it's written in a almost like autistic seeming literal mode where on the one hand he's going through these most foundational experiences of his life that have to do with the futile task of literature, which is sort of engaging in this task that no one, it's kind of these thankless tasks, which is becoming a monk on the one hand,
All of it's useless.
fighting for some cause, and the middle section he's fighting for this revolutionary, kind of vaguely leftist revolutionary cause in a random town in Italy, and then in the third part he's trying to become a writer. But Moresco has this weird tension where on the one hand there is a mystical quality to what he's striving for, but there's also a super whimsical, absurdist kind of like Kafkaesque mode where he's sort of laughing at the futility of what he's striving for. So they'll be in this random town and they'll be on the loudspeaker in the town square, trying to
Do a rally.
Do a rally.
Do a
But
demonstration.
Like the town is completely deserted.
Well, you think the town's deserted, and they're on this strangely named medieval canopy, which is referred to as a baldachin, and you don't really know why, but it's just like a stage that you erect. And after the meeting, the nameless narrator, who's a stand-in for Moresco, will say, well, I spoke out there for 3 hours, but it's such a shame that nobody was there to hear. And then his friend will say, what are you talking about? There were at least 150 people, and they were listening raptly the whole time. So it's based on this sort of futility and whimsy in equal measure, and also incredibly repetitive prose.
Right.
So
me and Max had this argument last time we spoke about this book, where he gave me this book in a way where I was really like taking his formal moves really seriously, because he's in this really serious context of taking a vow of silence in a monastery. But the book
Sean's inclined to take the book as like a mission statement for his own life.
Yeah. So, but as the book goes on, it sort of becomes a meta commentary on the futility of the task of literature itself. Would you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's a book that's about, I think, and this is sort of the conversation that we've been having this whole week, which is about what books need to do or what art needs to do, and whether something can just be formed for the sake of it or if it has to have a very strong message. And this book is an interesting test case, and I think it's actually true that every interesting work of literature is sort of split between two different modes in a certain sense, meaning that on the one hand, it does have a sort of consoling mirror message where it presents this kind of wisdom that you then go out into the world and you're consoled by and you think, oh, that's really true. On the other hand, it has to have formal play, because if it's just a message of consoling wisdom, that's not really art per se. So I'm inclined to see the formal play as being the thing that sort of takes the center stage and is all-encompassing. Sean and I have been arguing because Sean thinks it's not art if you have just whimsy, right? And so the Nabokov notion of art as being art for the sake of art, I think is like what we've been sort of discussing. But I also think that there is something very profound about a surface. And it's Nietzsche who says that, right? Like, that there's nothing more profound than the surface of things. And I think one of the most interesting things for me as we've been traveling across the country for the last few days has been seeing the aesthetic mode represented in our travels, sort of. So like we've had these Moresco-like situations, and you begin to see the world like Moresco, because he's a writer who's not built, he's not a maximalist writer in the Pinchonian sense, where you're sort of like seeing these different fascinating things. You've got these disquisitions about quantum mechanics or World War II. You're really seeing two or three things. You're seeing light, you're seeing sex, and you're seeing landscapes that are jumbled in these strange ways. But the way that they're described sort of manages to still be entrancing, and his sort of the way he processes the world, I think, is as specific as a Kafka or a Pynchon. So like again, it's these whimsical situations, and I don't want to read a long passage. I was going to read a very long, obscene passage because, oddly enough, the second book is almost entirely pornography. But I just kind of want to give an idea of...
Read some.
Well, I want to read more like just that funny little bit.
Sure.
Which is the sense of humor in this book, is because I realize we're sort of selling it in a sense. Because nobody's read it. It's not out yet because something happened with the cover. It's terrible and inexplicable. But it's here to buy, however, with the screwy cover. And I'll sign it in a funny way if you want me to. But his sense of humor is sort of remarkable in a certain way. So there's this moment when he's a very impoverished writer, and it is autofictional. And he's sitting at his table, ostensibly in the projects of Milan. And he's looking out his window. And he writes, "From the window in front of the table where I'm writing, I see Japanese people on the balcony opposite taking in their stretched out undies. Each of the Japanese people is thinner than the next, but their undies are incredibly large and baggy. They flutter around their groins like cloaks!" Exclamation mark. So it's sort of like this bizarre phenomenology mixed with this weird Italian whimsy. And Sean and I started to see the world for the last few days through the lens of Moresco. So yesterday, we were with Bill Volman, and we did an interview in Sacramento. And at the end of the interview, he, out of the blue, just goes, "Well, guys, what do you think? Should we go get some Liberian food?" And it was Nigerian food, first of all, not Liberian food. And we were sitting there, and it was just a surprising scene. The restaurant, like, they made each order one at a time, so one person's food would come out, and then the next person's food would come out 15 minutes later, and the following person's food would come out, which is in itself a Moresco situation. And then there were these women sitting next to us who were eating this thing called, I think, fufu, that's like kind of like yams and starch. And they had these incredibly long fake nails, and they were picking up the fufu and mixing it with this meat soup. And it was a pure Moresco image. And it was just sort of like this mode of seeing the world is like this sort of ridiculous phenomenology that's also very funny, starts to take you over. And it's built on incomprehension, right? The book is written in a way that makes no sense. It's written in a verbal tense that doesn't exist. So you can't, in Romance languages, use the imperfective past tense to elucidate chains of one-time actions. So you can't say, like, in the imperfective, I went to the store, I smoked a cigarette, I bought some cheese, I ate it, blah, blah, blah. You have to use the perfective tense. But Moresco does that here. So that is sort of the game of eternity of the trilogy's title. It's attempting to view the banality, the futility, the silliness of our existence as this sort of metaphysical integral in calculus terms that lasts forever. And I think that's really beautiful and also very funny and also very stupid. And it's pointless. It just depends how you look at it.
Yeah, what he's talking about is the tense he uses is he's talking about all these major events in his life, but he's saying everything in the habitual. So it's
habitual would in English.
We would do that. So and Francisco Pacifico, who wrote the intro, talks about how when you use the would, it sort of gives your actions a sense of eternity. So that also is this aspect of Moresco's work where he's focused on like the mundane and the silly and the absurd, but there's also mystical or mythical timeless element to all his actions. And I feel like we should talk about Moresco himself a little bit to give people a sense of this project. I mean, it's such an ambitious project, and it's sort of he was in his 40s, and he was kind of a failed writer.
His whole life is defined by failure in different ways.
The fact that we're even resuscitating, or Max is even resuscitating this work through Deep Vellum is like, I think it says something. I mean, and it's connected to Volman as well, because Volman's someone who's dedicating himself to these long books in an almost saint-like way. He's refusing to cut them down in order to be able to sell his books more. Same with Moresco, where there really is this sort of belligerent commitment to this quiet task that is sort of not legible to the economy. And so there's so much energy in American letters and just in modern times of everything has to be consumable, and this is so my reading is, we were joking about our contention about what the book is about, just because I think Max, he has so many strange linguistic quirks, and Max has to do the work of sorting through every single translation, whereas I'm just reading it quickly through as a reader and a writer. Well, I'm not translating every word.
Yeah. For example, there's a moment when he's working in the garbage dump, and there's an image that's sort of like you have wasps compared to droplets of yolk compared to flames, or sort of like there's this chain of images, and all of them are interrelated in some way. And at first I thought it was sort of this comparison of wasps to droplets of yolk, and they were flying into the fire. But it was actually that wasps were coming out of the fire to lick droplets of yolk from the narrator's glasses. Which is, so like, again, you have to, getting down in the weeds is definitely part of what made me love this book so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the fact that he's later in life and he is kind of a failure, and I think he feels a tension in himself about committing to this task of like trying to play the game of literature and write this great book. But he also, so it's a weird thing where he's focusing, and these are all things he did: joining the monastery, taking a vow of silence,
killing people,
wanting to become a priest, deciding not to do this, then joining a revolution, joining a revolutionary cause. That's also this failed commitment to this kind of like quiet task, stopping doing that, and then trying to become a writer. And the whole last part of the book is, and there's all these recurring characters that come back, and one of the characters from the first part ends up being this publisher that says, "Your book is the greatest book I've ever read. I can't stop thinking about it." But he's speaking through his secretary, and it's this book.
I loved it so much that I can't see you. Tell him that, and then he'll be barricaded in his office. He says, "I'm going to publish it, but you come meet me tomorrow." Oh, he's not there tomorrow, which is a
so
common
it's like
experience.
This weird cat and mouse game. But I think for Moresco himself, he recognizes the foolishness of his task, and he's simultaneously making fun of the endeavor of literature in the first place, while also being unable to help himself to not try to. Do you think that's accurate? I mean, Max kept saying to me, if you have to read the second part in order to understand the first part, because there is such a cryptic, there's no way the first section would make it through any editorial process in a publishing house, because there's so many.
It's turgid. It's really turgid, and I don't mean this as an insult.
He takes a vow of silence, and then every chapter, he's dwelling in every single side. It's almost like a picaresque mode, where a random character will come in, they'll leave, another random character will come. He's dwelling in the digressions.
Yeah. Well, the thing to say about Moresco is that he was never meant to be a writer. So he was. What I mean to say is that he was never committed to the art of writing at an early age. He never thought he was going to be a writer. He was a monk, wasn't a writer. Was a revolutionary during the years of lead, as they're called in Italy in the 1970s. And he, again, was part of these quite brutal leftist militias. So it's interesting to think of what he might or might not have done. And then he became a writer. But he didn't debut until he was 45. Now, to not debut until you're 45 as a novelist is tough. And then to debut with this incredibly dense work of fiction that's like your life work, that contains all of you, that is your way of viewing the world, your actual experiences, and you view it as a bomb. He thought he was casting a bomb into the heart of Italian literature, and he wasn't. Well, he was. But it was a bomb that would take a long time to go off. So it fell out of print. The editor famously said, "I don't understand a fucking thing about this book," when he got it, because not only the tense, but his use of, the way he uses words is completely nonsensical. And then, it was a huge failure. He was very impoverished. He still is. Not flush, exactly.
But it was acclaimed, correct?
It was not acclaimed. No.
Okay.
Which is funny, because it's like, why are we reading this book then? But I think it really is a great book, and my pitch for it is sort of to do with what this whole project and what Sean and I are so engaged in right now. And let's talk about Vollmann in the sense that Vollmann is one of the great writers of American literature. He got dropped by Viking when he was, I think, already ill, immediately after his daughter died. and he's a giant, he's a real giant, and he was just like dropped, and he had to find his new publishing house. He was in a financially precarious situation. He was treated with just utter disrespect, but it's because he was committed to a form of literature that is not immediately comprehensible, right? And that's what we're celebrating, because it goes so against the grain of what people are interested in now. It's not like an autoplay Netflix show. You have to work for it a little.
Yeah.
But that's no great sin. In fact, it's probably important, but I don't want to think of literature in that way, which kind of goes back to what we're talking about. Like, I don't think it's important to see it in a certain way. I'm just interested in the way he sees. That might also be important, but that's a side effect. Okay.
Yeah. What do you mean you don't want to see it in that way? What way?
I don't want to be like, it's just good for you. Then it's like NPR shit.
Oh, it's good for you to struggle through?
Or like, this is, in this age of TikTok and Trump, it's going to really help you to...
Right.
I don't want to see books in that way, because if you make it like wheat bread, it's not...
But I think,
cool.
but I think there is a weird effect that the book has on you where...
That's what I mean, though. I like the effect that that's why we talk about it differently. Because you want to talk about it as like a spiritual, philosophical, consoling mirror. And I want to talk about it as just being very funny and whimsical.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is the flow is very strange. It's not difficult to read on a sentence level.
It's like The Making of Americans by Gertrude Stein.
But what's interesting about it is in the second half, in the subsequent volume, which is coming out soon from Deep Vellum.
Yeah, next year. I could read a chunk from that too if you want.
But in the second volume, he basically so he starts trying to publish the book you're reading at the end of this novel, and finally after playing this whole cat and mouse game in the third part, he finally encounters the publisher, and it's his old friend, and then because he only has one manuscript, he needs the manuscript back, and then in the second half. In the subsequent volume that's coming out next year, Songs of Chaos, basically the publisher tells him that the whole first part is too difficult to read. It's too boring for the masses. So you need to write about sex.
You need to write about spermicidal lubricant and remote-controlled garage doors. Is what he says.
To keep the people engaged. So then, it kind of casts the whole first part. In a different way, but I don't know. I think there's just such the effect that it has does, I think, reflect the absurdity of the literary endeavor in the first place, which I think is a kind of like comforting task. I mean, it did remind me of visiting Volman in some ways, because I mean, his new book is 3,400 pages, and he refused to edit it down, or actually he tried to edit it down. He tried to edit it down and ended up adding 200 pages to it. So it's like, I don't know. I just think that there aren't that many books that are being published in this way that emphasize this aspect of literature, which is as this sort of like more of like a monk-like or a priest-like or saint-like mode. And so I think it's really valuable that you're bringing it, and even the act of resuscitating this book. That, I mean, you say it's not acclaimed, but it's a
cult classic. Yeah,
and there are elements of the book that allude to early, like, there's Dante comparisons in the copy. And there is.
But I think we wrote those.
Right, but there's an element of like there's some secret codes in the book, like every part ends. Every part of the Dante trilogy ends with the word stars, right? And every part of this book ends with the word yes, which is also the last word of Ulysses, because Penelope finally says yes. I mean, not Penelope. I'm blanking. Molly, thank you. Which is Penelope. In the Homeric sense. But she says yes to Bloom at the end. But I think that it's like Moresco's mode of like completely looking clear-eyed at the futility of the task, but nonetheless like saying yes to it.
But what's really interesting is in the translation that shifted, because you can't keep clausal order the same between languages. So in the translation, it's yes, yes, nothing. and which is a cool change that was introduced. The last word of the book is nothing.
Yeah,
which
the
is
last word, but the last line is
yes. No, of course.
It's
Still a yes at the end,
yeah.
but the very last word is nothing. Which is like there's an amazing typo in Schattenfall, which I have no idea how it happened. Which is there's this famous German Protestant guy who's beheaded in the book, and the translation was like liberated of his head. Münzenberg was liberated of his head, and somehow one of the copy editors took out of his head, so it became Münzenberg was liberated. Period. So the book, with a mind of its own, liberated this real Protestant reformer who was beheaded. So sometimes changes in translation, even typos. I mean, Joyce with the 1922 original version of Ulysses liked it much more with the typos. And when they tried to correct the typos, he said, "Oh, I'd really prefer it to stay with those typos." And they went, "Well, they're nonsense." And he said, "Well, nevertheless, I think they add quite a lot." So I think sometimes books have a mind of their own.
Yeah,
yes, nothing.
The
I
ending,
like. Yeah.
Well, the ending is don't wait. Do it before he opens that demi-mouth of his again to pronounce the third yes, as if it were nothing.
As if it were nothing. Yeah.
But it's also interesting in the context of like the kind of inanity of the American literary dialogue around like autofiction. Because obviously most of the great works of literature, we're talking about Proust or Celine or Kerouac or basically every great work of literature is taking your life and giving it a formal, interesting kind of cycling it through that. And obviously Moresco these are his foundational experiences in his life. But I think the prose is so counterintuitive, and it's so its own thing. What do you think about? Do you have anything?
Well, we were talking about autofiction. Autofiction has a bad name, and like your boy Harold, when he wrote a piece about Schadenfreude last year, saying it was autofiction, was like people on Twitter were going crazy, saying like, oh, well, like it's not autofiction. What a foolish thing to say. It's like no, actually, like the Divine Comedy is actually autofiction. Kerouac.
Yeah.
It is.
Oh yeah, he went into hell.
Yeah, well, he goes into hell. It's amazing. I mean, like it's autofiction because it's about this guy named Dante writing about himself and his love Beatrice,
of course.
and like
Of course.
recasting his life in metaphysical terms. Celine is autofiction. Kerouac is autofiction. Just because there's like this impoverished mode of dime square autofiction, which is about like doing coke and whatever, doesn't mean that autofiction as a genre is cursed.
No,
right?
Yeah.
And that's like Moresco is a great example of that. Schadenfreude is a great example of that. And actually, I thought this a lot. This is like a thought I was fixated on when I was in college with Knausgård, that like the new literary idiom has to be a version of the selfie, because we unfortunately live in the era of the self in a certain way. So it's like not possible to write novels in the same way as it was in the 19th century, where like novelists had almost a seer-like ability to inscribe themselves in the consciousnesses of others in a variety of circumstances and just go. Now, we really are marooned, like Tolstoy, in our own consciousness, and like there's a way of doing it that's good and interesting. There's a way of doing it that sucks, but autofiction itself is not a cursed form. So I think that is like, this is a resurrection. I mean, no, that's stupid. Yeah, but it's like you can do whatever you want with books, at the end of the day.
So there was also an element of the book that was too obscene. Is that
well, in book
correct?
2, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So part 2 of the book, Songs of Chaos, which is what I'm most excited for, and which again, the beginnings probably gets short shrift a little bit because I love Songs of Chaos so much. Songs of Chaos is also in print, and it's sort of like if Bresson had suddenly decided to become De Palma, like the second book is like Moresco wants to be the Tom Clancy of anal sex, who wants to write like Gertrude Stein. It's really, 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 really weird and crazy. And I think that the whiplash between the 2 volumes is incredibly important. And it's sort of like, again, has to do with whether you can have the patience to allow yourself to see something that occurs over such a grand canvas. But yeah, I mean, book 2 couldn't be more different, and what's so interesting about it is it has to do with these questions of like utility, streamlined, art and commerce. So the first book is obviously too strange, too turgid, too metaphysical. It's like a style coming into being with warts and all. Part 1, could use some cutting down. Part 2, a little closer. Part 3, great. Then he goes to, Songs of Chaos, but it's not edited at all. But there's value in that. Again, though, it failed, and what happened is at the beginning of Part 2, Book 2, I'll read just a tiny, tiny chunk. So the cat is talking to him, and he says...
The cat is his friend.
The cat is his...
monastery who ends up being his publisher at the end, who I was referencing earlier.
Yeah, and he said, look, nobody's interested in those things anymore. Now, men have remote-controlled garage door openers, and women have vibrators. Think how easy it would be for you to finally learn the craft, now that you've navigated vast structures and long waves. To devise little things of 100 or 200 pages, to make yourself a nice little outline, a plan, easier and easier each time you do it, ever more successful, ever more polished. All these handsome little tasks, all lined up until the day you die, one every year, every 2 years, to make the most of the moments that you have left, that literature has left, to at least get something out of it. Well, vast and multimedia-oriented economico-cultural enterprises are still dragging along a caricature of that ever more marginal genre. Last rites, last dividends in recycled projects, now transcended. So it's gobbledygook a little bit.
That's a perfect.
It's a good encapsulation. Yeah,
that's a perfect thing to quote. And because there's also the element of this coming out in 1998, and when he's first finally speaking to the cat about his book in Part 3, there's this kind of like bit about trying to write the masterpiece before 2000, before the millennium comes, and trying to find some way of ascension into a higher level of, we're all trying to get out of the stream of time, repetitive time until death, So these are his 3 ways of trying. I think there's something about being able to look at that and not trying to escape it that is integral to what a good literary voice can share with the reader. It's certainly what Volman does, I think, to some degree.
Yeah.
But I would wager that there is an innovation to what he's doing.
There has to be, yeah.
Which is that, this idea of writing the great expansive novel where you try to get the reader to chase you around as you go through a million rabbit holes of esoteric knowledge, which is kind of how the maximalist novel operates with like Pynchon and Gaddis and DFW, etc., where Moresco just completely takes out any interiority, and he's just sort of repetitively describing the world. So the disorientation isn't that the sentence is long and there's many clauses and there's like random information he's tapping into that's hard to follow. It's that he's describing things and actually you're not quite sure why he is describing them or where he is, where he's describing. So there's a mesmerizing element, a cumulatively mesmerizing element that even in the first part, like, I was swimming when I was first reading that first part, but there was something like over time, and the tone will be sometimes reverent and mythical and mystical, and then there's these insertions of obscenity. So he's literally taking a vow of silence at the monastery, which is about as kind of serious a mode as you can have. And then I think he has to get an adult circumcision, and then he's got this weird cast on his thing. And he's like, and then this woman shows up, the peach, and he's like kind of attracted to the peach.
This is your theory, though. I'm not sure this is.
You're saying he doesn't
have a
nocturnally.
Well, he doesn't have a spontaneous ejaculation. It's not. Yeah, he might.
Recovering
He
from
could.
his adult circumcision.
Well, he's just got cum in his bandage.
Okay, right. So maybe he came not nocturnally.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know why. There's just cum there.
Okay. He's tapping back on my reading of what happens when he gets the adult circumcision. But I mean.
No, he might. I think Sean's theory is pretty good.
Okay.
It just
I
is
mean,
not described. There's
But
just,
that might speak to the strange,
Well, it's
eerie,
yeah.
mesmerizing element of the prose, where things kind of happen and people come in and people leave, and there's an absurd element. And that's really what Max was trying to say in the beginning as we have been in this Moresco mode and we're traveling around, and there are sometimes, life just goes like that, where kind of absurd, strange things happen, and we think things are going to go a certain way. I mean, even the trip out to Sacramento to see Volman, there were just so many strange. I don't know. I think that's part of Moresco's vision.
You begin to
of
see the
being
world
able
as being incomprehensible, and
Right.
it makes a certain kind of sense.
and that's why it's Kafkaesque, right?
Yeah.
Because
Or-
things are happening according to a logic that are strange, and we're not really sure why they're happening. And I mean, it's even like Faulknerian in some ways, where you can't even understand what's going on until only retrospectively.
But
Things are just happening to you.
There's a great example in here of the sense of humor that I think speaks for the book better than anything else. Is so when the cat and this guy are negotiating about publishing the book, the cat being the publisher, friend, whatever. So the publisher and the writer are negotiating about publishing the book. They don't have an agreement. They don't have anything. The publisher says, "You know what? We don't have an agreement yet, but I'm going to send a biographer to your house." And he goes, "Well, biographer? Like, my book's not even published. Who's going to want to read my biography?" And the biographer moves into his house, and he's afflicted with a premature aging disorder. And he ages 60 years in 2 weeks. So very quickly they're taking care of him and getting catheters and like going to medical supply stores. And he dies. And they go to bury him, and then they dig up a skeleton in the graveyard, and the guy goes, "What are you doing? Why are you digging up a skeleton?" He says, "Oh, it's a magician's skeleton. I thought it might come in handy." No, that's just it. So, and
But that's totally pointing at the absurdity and the futility of the literary task. Like, he hasn't even been able to. He hasn't even spoken to the publisher yet, and the publisher just sends him a biographer to like cover his life and stuff.
Yeah.
And then the biographer immediately dies. But
there was a moment. We had another Moresco moment when we were.
the humor evolves. Initially you're
Yeah.
confused, and then it starts to get really funny.
Yeah, we had another Moresco moment yesterday when we were going to pick up our rental car to drive to Sacramento from SFO. You can't actually drive to the airport to pick up a rental car, it turns out. You can't drive to the rental car pickup area. And our driver didn't speak English. Turned out he spoke Turkish, but my Turkish is imperfect, and I was trying to tell him how to get into the rental car area, and I did enough for us to get out of the car, and he didn't want to proceed any further. And I realized I didn't know the word for spikes, and in rental car garages, there are a lot of spikes. If you drive over the wrong way, your tires get shredded. So we sort of got out of the car, and I said, "Be careful in here." He said, "Why?" And I said, "Have a good day." And we just let him go on his way. Which was it sort of felt Moresco in the moment, but I guess it's any great writer teaches you how to see the world in their mode. And in Moresco, there is nothing being described, the description is all. So there's one more great example, and then maybe we can take a few questions, but is that there's this word in the book, sgranato, which he's obsessed with. And sgranato means something like shucked. It's like, or hulled, removing the outer shell from a grain. Not a very common word. You can have, your eyes can be sgranati, and it just means they're wide open. But it's a weird usage. And for Moresco, when he's describing the world, suddenly everything becomes sgranato. And it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't make any sense. So the light's shucked, which was the word we ended up using. Air is shucked. A smell is shucked. A body is shucked. And we asked Antonio what he meant by it. And he said, well, it's like if you have a camera and you zoom in way too far and it's a digital image. And I said, okay, pixelated. But you wrote this in the early 90s when there was no pixelation, really. And he said, yeah, you're right. So we just had to think of a version of what that word would be. And again, the words don't actually mean anything. He's constantly describing things as exorbitated, which is practically the same word in Italian as in English because of Latin, thank you. At one point, there's squares of deodorant on the ceiling of an elevator that drip onto the narrator's head. And I asked Francesco, and I would have these late night conversations. Francesco Pacifico, my editor, who's a great Italian writer, we'd be having Google Docs conversations at like 2 a.m. in Italy, and he'd be in bed, ostensibly naked. Well, maybe not naked, maybe wearing silk underwear, about to drift off. And I'd be writing to him these very detailed questions. And I'd say, you know, God, Francesco, I really can't figure out what that means. And he'd go, what the fuck is that? Ha ha ha. And I go, great, okay. So, you know, it's a book that is, there's nothing being described in this book. It's a grower, it's not a shower. It's like, it's one of those records where you hear it the first time, it's too long, you're not sure you like it. Then you listen to it a lot of times and you like it better than the one you liked the first time. So it was really in that editorial process that I fell in love with it. Working with Francesco, working with Antonio. We had a crazy draft a month and a half before it was due because we had to deal with all the things that didn't mean anything. And we had a million questions for Antonio, and we had to turn that fractal into like a Polaroid photograph. And so it's like maybe the translation I'm the proudest of in that sense, that it's like, it's great.
He's not trying to impress you with his language. Like there are repetitive elements. He loves what's some of the words he loves?
Exorbitated, shuck, drench.
Pullulate. He loves
pullulate. Yeah. That's kind of my
mean?
creation.
Oh, gotcha.
Well, because I just wanted to Robert Chandler, the great translator from Russian, has a theory about Catholic versus Protestant translations. So Catholic translations are like the Latin Mass. You sort of sit there and you don't understand a fucking thing, but you're like, wow, Latin. So a Catholic translation like sort of refers to the original and you feel the exquisite carapace. Whereas a Protestant translation, it's like you read a 19th century novel in a Protestant translation from yesterday and everyone's like speaking as if it were today. You sort of go, whoa, this is really weird. So you over-explain God. You know, God becomes... whatever. And so I want this to be a Catholic translation. So pullulate, pullare, it means to swarm.
Gotcha.
And but pullulate does mean the same thing in English. It's just a much
swarm.
Weirder word.
Yeah.
But I took the weirder word.
Yeah, and you know, you could argue that it's too long, but he obviously mocks that in the third part. And I think there is something interesting about the effect it has on you, where even in the middle section when they're on this revolutionary cause and they're trying so hard for this, and our natural brain is like trying to figure out what the cause is and how they're going to achieve it. And you know, like I said, initially they got the loudspeaker and they're in a weird car, and there's always like a guy with no arms, or like a blind man or something with random people. And then they're like, we finally made it to the headquarters, but the headquarters is like this abandoned house, and there's like, they walk in, there's randomly a little kid in there.
Yeah, the little kid is the only employee of the headquarters.
Then there's no one in the town, and they have this like one heater that's like way too hot, and there's mice infested. Like you see, like everything he's doing is like testing your built-in like optimism and your idea of like this cause you're gonna achieve, and he's able to look at the futility of it and nonetheless say yes.
It's also just fucking funny though. I think
it is funny
because like there's like a character named
repetitive and absurd.
Lenin shows up in the book, the great comrade Lenin, who we all so love. And Lenin is one of the revolutionaries in the book is an assistant to taxidermist in Soviet Russia, and they're watching Lenin as he gets endless blowjobs on his deathbed. And they're instructed to, when he dies, you've got to get in there immediately and taxidermy him, because obviously Lenin is taxidermied on Red Square today, even. Although it's not really him anymore. All the molecules have been changed, basically. Just looks like him a little. And so they're meant to get in there and taxidermy him. And so that's a very sort of obviously great vignette in the novel that people will point to and be like, oh, this is the Moresco who we know later on making his first appearance. But there's also a caretaker of a farmhouse named Lenin with an accent, and it's not a name that exists in Italian. It really doesn't seem that funny, but it's like, I don't know, it is also very, very funny.
Do you think that his emphasis on like kind of like obscene sex stuff, because in the second part, the publisher keeps saying, you need to like write a better, you know, a more sellable next book. So in order to get in the right headspace, you need to go see the muse. Every name is like the muse, the cat.
Yeah, it's a capitalized. Every name is a
And
capitalized noun.
it capitalized noun, and it gives a sense of like he's drawing on life stuff when you use that convention. So he shows up to the muse's house, and she like answers the door naked, and she has like semen on her face. It's very
You don't have to
strange.
tell that part.
Well, it gets very obscene.
Yeah.
And then she's like taking in every single one of his writers. That he
Yeah,
sends
the
him to,
publisher
like,
sends
inspire-
writers to the
sends writers.
muse, who's essentially an escort
But
who
there seems to be
inspires
some
them.
like weird joke about how much everything's really just about sex and like this. I don't know. What do you think that's about?
What I think Songs of Chaos is again he's reacting to the failure
I didn't mean to scare
of the
everybody with
beginning.
book by saying this.
No, it's it's fine. There's a lot of come in that
She's
book.
naked too.
Yeah,
She
she
says
is.
it's
No,
not, there's no point in putting on our clothes for every single one.
yeah,
of
because
our
the next
clients.
guy's gonna be there. So
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, Tom Clancy of anal sex. But the point is that I think it's like Lou Reed with Metal Machine Music, where he was like belligerently getting out of his record contract and on tons and tons of speed, and he invented noise music. You know, so the belligerent gesture takes on a life of its own and becomes metaphysical. So this book is obviously metaphysical, right?
So the belligerent is the obscene sex stuff.
Yeah. Well, because he's like, you want obscene sex, you want a saleable
Right.
book, here you fucking go.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think he's making fun of like our obsession with like yes.
But then it
sex.
takes on a life of its own is the key thing.
And then he scares you with it though.
Yeah.
He
Well, it
goes
just
so
goes
crazy.
beyond. It's like it was like Lou Reed. It's like, you know what? Fuck you. I'm gonna give you an album that's only guitar feedback.
Right.
And it's like, actually, this album's kind of sick. But simultaneously, it was the most returned RCA album of all time because Lou Reed was on a great tear and like releasing only hits. Then he released Metal Machine Music, and all the kids went and bought it, and they're like, "This isn't music." And I guess you could return CDs or records back then, which
Nice.
I didn't know.
Yeah. So how was this experience of translating this compared to Schadenfreude and the other books you translated?
Well, Schadenfreude is like a dominatrix because Lentz has all these referential beats he wants to hit at all times. So it's like a lot of philosophy and literature that you just have to use quotations from or terminology from. And it's a book that knows what it wants. Sorokin and Moresco are similar in that I can kind of jam with them and like my own input into the book, my own stylization, my own ideas are valid and like have a place. So like with the beginnings, you know, what Francesco said to me, this may be like a good place to end before we get some questions, is he said, Max, Antonio got out of Italian in a very special way. You will not be able to get out of English in the same way. And so I said, oh, I don't even know what that means. But I do know what it means now, and I hope I did. It's not really in English. It's not really in any language. It's just in Moresco language. And I think like it's a book that will, the more time you spend with it, the more it will teach you to see the world in its own way. And Italian writers, if you talk to, he's a writer's writer in a certain sense. So like Vincenzo Latronico, all those guys, Francesco, my boy, if you ask them about Moresco, they'll immediately break out the esorbitato, sbagnato, sgranato, those weird words he's obsessed with. Because he taught those writers to see the world like he does, which is what we should all hope to do as writers.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you shared this book with me. I think that so many books that I receive, I feel like they've been edited for and streamlined and checked for extraneous elements, and there's kind of a thrill of reading this massive, digressive, strange, mesmerizing, like, I don't know, mystical but also completely absurd and hilarious at times book. It feels like I'm reading literature, you know. It's like how I feel when a friend sends me like a dense PDF that they wrote, you know. It's just different than getting that, you know.
Yeah, not a polished
sanitized,
book.
American work.
Not
So,
a Viking Bill Volman kicking off
right.
bullshit book.
Yeah, so props
Fuck
to
you,
you
Viking.
for putting the book out. And maybe a couple questions if anyone has any, or
Yeah.
Now I'm really curious, like how you discovered this? Like, if it's out of print, how do you find the Italian, or was it recommended?
I illegally downloaded it.
I love that. Where is that?
Well, no, I mean, I found it because of this blog this guy I work with who has a blog, Andre of the Untranslated. He is like, he's responsible for so much of my career. He's like a truffle sniffing pig. He reads in a bunch of languages, gave me the bravery to read in a bunch of languages. I'm not allowed to reveal his identity for actually a good reason, but I can't say it. But he reads a bunch of languages, has a PhD, and was like, you can read in those languages too. And his blog is all hits, it's all gold. And Will Evans, the Deep Vellum publisher, and I both were reading the blog and getting intoxicated by the ideas of these books. And that's what Schadenfreude came from. That's what Moresco comes from. That's what the Sorias comes from, Alberto Laiseca, which I know some of the heads in the room, I get DMs a lot about this. That's now coming out 2029, confirmed as of today. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I hear a little late to cover this, but one thing I noticed just traveling around Italy is how many different provincial dialects there are. And like in Lago di Garda, you got like 4 different dialects in around one lake. I wondered, with all the strange language variations you're describing there, all the weird phonics, did you notice, is there any particular like provincial theme, like more southern Italian, Tuscan, northern impression, something like that?
It's kind of the opposite. It's like a not Italian. It's not really written in Italian. It's just written in Moresco baby talk. Like, the syntax is very simple. He just has his pet words, and it's like, I mean, I'm translating Songs of Chaos right now, and I have to do it fast, so I'm working on it for like 6 hours a day, and I probably, forgive me, write the word drenched pussy like 7 times a day, 8 times a day. So he's just like, I don't know. It's like The Making of Americans by Gertrude Stein is a good example, but it's not really provincial. There was one problem with like a word for sink that's the same as the word for bucket in northern Italy, and I was like, why does nobody have sinks? They all have buckets. This makes no sense. But they're sinks. So that's an example. But it's really not it's not dialectic at all.
Okay.
Dialectical, yeah.
You started by saying that the book is about failure, and then you said, and actually the book is a failure.
Yeah.
And I wondered, at first I thought you meant that stylistically, aesthetically...
No.
And then I wasn't sure. You meant just that it was a financial failure?
In worldly terms, it's a failure.
Yeah.
It's like William Blake was a failure. The great poet William Blake. Everyone knows Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, blah, 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 blah. William Blake was actually probably schizophrenic, we know now, and was writing these vast pamphlets that he illuminated and selling them on the side of the road effectively. So it'd be like going, I don't know where, and seeing some guy selling weird little plastic booklets of his own schizophrenic thoughts. Blake sold probably 10 of each of his poems in his lifetime, right? He was a failure. But was he a failure? No, of course not. Everyone reads Blake, and nobody reads anybody else from back then. So worldly failure in the moment often translates to eternal glory. Too bad they don't get to know that. So no, it's a worldly failure, and in certain respects, I don't think it's an aesthetic grand slam. I think part of what's so interesting about the book is it's like a book that you feel him getting better as it goes. And some people like records by younger bands where they're finding their voice. You know, some people like those records more than like the solid gold classics.
But simultaneously self-conscious about that fact because of how the second volume starts and his discussion with his publisher about how the first part is too dense and too confusing. So I don't know, that gives it a cumulative quality that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, like the trilogy as well. Yeah.
But it's literally out of print in Italy, so in that sense, it's a worldly failure.
But a good fraction of all the books that we're here to think about and talk about have that same initial history, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Fiscal failure.
well, it's become so much more extreme now. There was like this golden age of weird books, probably from Ulysses to 2005. I don't know, maybe even 1998. I'm just saying those numbers are random. But like the 20th century, there was this era where you could kind of, especially in Europe, but no, in America too. I mean, American postmodernism determined the whole idiom, right? Like Gaddis and Gass are much more responsible for how people think of postmodernism, not to mention Pinch and DeLillo, than any European writer of that cohort. So I just think that
It's arguable whether a book has immediate worldly success, whether that's a success in a larger sense or not, right?
But I
It might
think
be Ulysses, Sound of the Fury, things like this, right?
But-
Initially, they're not.
Largely irrelevant.
yeah.
Now,
Aesthetically.
initially. Oh, you're saying so?
It's, that kind of success is irrelevant.
Right.
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
exactly.
definitely.
Because you're saying that, his
No, and a lot of the books that we're talking about are interested in like fucking faceplant
But
initially.
that's,
Yeah.
and also these literally trying to become a monk and taking a vow of silence and trying to do a leftist revolutionary cause in an abandoned town that has no see how there's a meta element to it where these are literally this divine ambition versus worldly ambition, and he's connecting those to the literary task, right? And that's part of his larger message. And I don't think that people would allow this type of cumulative message to happen in like the immediate, publishing landscape or any landscape, any economic landscape.
Yeah, Metal Machine Music, most returned record in RCA history. I just bought the 50th anniversary record for way too much money, and it's really handsome and has liner notes by Thurston Moore. So
I think his commentary on that is what makes it.
The Thurston Moore commentary on Metal
No,
Machine
the
Music.
Moresco.
That's
I'm
good
not-
for you. No, no, no.
I don't know.
Stop.
I don't have your music.
You have different music. I don't have
yeah.
your music knowledge. Gus.
Hey, so you alluded to Stein a few times, and I'm just wondering, was he is there any evidence that she was someone he was actively thinking about, or what other kind of modernist or postmodernist writers is he kind of actively putting his work in conversation with, if any?
He's not a literary guy in a certain sense. Again, what Francesco said to me is like, Antonio was somebody who was never meant to be a writer. And part of what that means is he's not like reading deep cuts, and going, oh, what's so important for me? Malaparte. That's really what I'm thinking about. And actually, again, I love this book. I love this book. But there's a part at the end that's a little bit corny, where there's a party of all the literary... I know, you like it. It's good. There's a party at the end of all the literary figures that Moresco loves. So Smirdyakov is there, Emily Dickinson's there, I think... Cervantes is there. Some other people are there. And that's sort of the level he's reading at, And that's not a diss at all. A lot of great writers only read the greats, the great greats, But he's not. I don't think, if I said, Antonio, like, what do you think of Gertrude Stein? Say, Ma que?
Right at the end, it's like this joke celebratory moment where they finally see his manuscript. The publisher finally shows him his manuscript, and it's a party, and all the great writers are there, and they're all dancing. So it's kind of like I thought it was funny where it's like making fun of, this is a writer's dream. We're going to get to a party, and every great writer is going to be there, and we're all going to be dancing, But I would say whether intentionally or not, I would say probably the books that it's most like Kafka or Beckett, I feel like, because of the absurdist quality.
Yeah.
We came up with the Stein on the pod recently. We thought that was an interesting comparison just because of the repetitiveness and the...
It's more palatable than
strange
Stein,
effect.
though.
I don't think he was reading Making the American Zone.
No, it's not as bad. It's not as bad as Making American.
Yeah. It's more palatable and more linear than Stein, which is not saying anything.
Yeah. You said something at the beginning, and you came back to this about how American readers who are steeped in the sort of postmodernist lit bro canon of your Gaddises and Gaddis and Pynchon and Wallace and so on, that they sort of wouldn't know what to make of this in the sense that it doesn't slot in with those other tomes, and I guess I was curious if you talk more about that, because you say that what distinguishes this maybe is that there's so little focus on interiority. Everything is external. It's phenomenological and stuff. And it's very funny and stuff. And I guess I'm just curious more how, why you think it's so alien to the equivalent big American fiction postmodernist books.
It's something I've faced. I've only really seen on the internet. Nobody's said this to my face. But when people are yo, they're saying this book's super important, but it reads funny. This doesn't read as well. This doesn't read as good as Gravity's Rainbow. He got BTFO, shot and fro, read kind of funny. And it's like, yeah, because it's a collage of Heidegger, East German architecture journals, and like, I don't know, Lenz's weird incest fantasy about his mom. It's not like there's a way in which Gaddis, Gass, Pynchon, whatever, are very conservative. Like when I read DeLillo, I think that it's just his advertising copy transplanted into more conceptual space. So it seems to me that where literature is going more now is something that has happened in music and visual art for a long, long time, which is that like you can do ugly things. You don't actually have to write well. You can write interestingly, but not well.
Right.
What does that mean? So I think that with Moresco, like, for a certain kind of finely tuned stylist, they'd read it and be like, oh, what is this?
On a sentence-to-sentence level, it's not difficult to read. Like, those books are operating on virtuosity. So, like, you're always chasing the meaning. And the genius or the innovation is so it's almost like, in a way, it's almost like Now Scarred.
Yeah, that's true.
Minus his commitment to himself as the great writer who's trying to make it, and him telling you why he's describing everything. It's just describing stuff with no meaning, and then continually mocking the idea of kind of whatever optimism he built in you with what he was generating. So it's like, it's belligerent. It's belligerently committed to this strange mode. And the book is so big, so you're wondering how he was able to just commit to it and how it made it into my hand. You know what I mean? So it really is easy to read.
Yeah,
It's easy to read on a sense level. And it's even repetitive, like we're saying. These words he keeps coming back to, where an editor would be like, you just said shucked, which is the most random word, like 3 pages ago, but he just keeps going, and it's
It wasn't edited, for one thing.
Yeah.
And we found some things where I was like, Francesco, I don't think they edited this. And he was like, don't tell anybody that. Feltrinelli will be mad at me. Because Francesco is also a Feltrinelli. And I'll tell people like this story, which is that Francesco is also a Feltrinelli and Moresco is a Feltrinelli.
Is that publisher?
Yeah, that was the original publisher. And Francesco was like, yes, so I was writing at the same time as Antonio, and I have experienced Catholicism-induced impotence. And at the same time, my Feltrinelli editor was telling me, you should really write about Catholicism-induced impotence. He was telling Antonio, you should really write about anal sex a bit more. So,
it's like,
why I even said that, I don't know.
It's like the typos in Welfare by Steve Anwill. Hell, I don't know. So that feels like a belligerent book.
Yeah, it's belligerent. It's wrong. It's amazing. Yeah.
I'm curious what you think this writer does well about dimensionality, because it seems like it uses that pretty significantly well. And I'm just curious if you could describe maybe what is successful about his use of dimensionality. It seems like that makes it very unique.
What do you mean by dimensionality?
Spatiality, you mean? Like where the species is
like
describing
he
the visual
references like the fourth wall, where he's breaking the fourth wall in the way that you mentioned the length of the book. He kind of like makes fun of that. The idea of the muse as like a character is kind of like you mentioned, like has a dimensionality to it that extended that idea, like of symbolic in some way. So I'm just curious, what else makes this successful?
Well, the whole trilogy is a remarkably successful canvas in the way, I guess, the conceptual element's very important. The way that it builds upon itself is wonderful. I think that's sort of what you mean, like how does it? What sort of edifice does it build?
Are you talking about the sort of full commentary on itself that I was alluding to?
Well, it's doing a lot of things, like very successfully.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, no, they're definitely that kind of does come later in the third part, and then starts casting the book differently, and does create a different dimension of how you're looking at it. But I think that what he does best is, surprise, because he'll be driving in a certain direction. Just like it starts out as it's surreal and kind of confusing, and then kind of funny, which is how kind of how Kafka reads. So it's like, and we'll be driving in a certain direction, and there'll be these sudden changes of space or tone of what's going on. But that meta element does come later in the book and reflect back on the early stuff. But it is kind of a thrill when you get there, the third part of this book.
What I would say is a vast and idiotic construction in the best way possible. So it's like Synecdoche, New York. It's like Dow, a film project I'm very interested in and into. It's a folly. The best works of art are follies that are partially successful and sort of crashing failures in other ways.
And to me, there's a thrill to these tasks, these optimistic tasks of trying to become a monk, trying to be a revolutionary. And in a way, it is like Cervantes, where he's like belligerently committed to this almost insane, idiotic task, and then you're kind of laughing at him, but you're also kind of inspired. Yeah.
Maybe one more.
So I haven't read the book, but a lot of what I've read about it focuses on the lack of interiority, which I find is also characteristic of like a lot of Nouveau Roman novels and even a lot of older crime fiction. So I guess my question is, how do you see Moresco's technique differing from these other traditions, or if there might even be like a point of comparison?
I just don't think he cares about the traditions in the sense, and that's not a slight on your question. You're obviously right in a certain kind of way. I just think he's like a crazy guy writing a book, and the way it's like Blake. It doesn't really belong to any tradition. This is Francesco and I make great hay of our Cosmo Kramer comparison, and I think my favorite way to view Moresco is a kind of literary Cosmo Kramer. And there's a Seinfeld episode where, Kramer bursts into Jerry's room and he's kind of covered in sawdust or something. I don't remember exactly. And Jerry says, "What's going on?" And Kramer says, "Levels, Jerry. I'm building levels." And Jerry's like, "What does that mean?" He's like, "I'm just redoing the whole apartment. Levels." And we never see the apartment redone based on levels. We never hear anything more about it other than he's more flustered than usual, and they're like logistical jokes, I guess. That levels is a metaphysical gag almost, and I think that's much more Moresco-like than the Nouveau Roman for me. So, sorry, I know Nouveau Roman's cool too.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Put it.
Cool.
Thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you guys for coming out. Appreciate it.